My name is Michael Prentice. I am a GDG South Region mentor, so I'm also a GDG organizer, just like Luke. I organize the Space Coast chapter in Florida. It's in the Cape Canaveral area, east of Orlando. So today I'm going to talk about adaptive UI with Angular material. And here's the agenda. So who here has used Angular before? Okay, almost half, pretty good. Who has used Bootstrap before? Okay, and who has used material design? Okay, good. I'm just trying to get a feel so if I, make reference to things, I will have an idea of the audience here. But it looks good. So we're going to go through these topics today, some sort of high-level overview of adaptive UI as material design describes it, as well as tools, and then some of the implementation done with Angular material. So responsive design changed a lot of things for the web. Adaptive UI is a next step. It isn't something totally new. Instead, it brings guidance and refines known patterns. So if you've used Bootstrap, responsive screen sizes change, your UI changes to look better on those devices. Adaptive UI is just taking that to another level and giving you some different behaviors and some patterns around when to use those behaviors and when they make sense. So here are the material design responsive breakpoints for desktop. These are very similar to Bootstrap, but note that some of the sizes are slightly different. We've got 600, 960, 1280, 1440, and 1600. Sorry, it's a little dark up there. And this is the full breakpoint diagram for material design. There's a lot more stuff on here. So desktop is still this top sort of large bar. Then we've got portrait, phones, and tablets, and then landscape, phones, and tablets, and where they fit in. The number of columns on the second row, or 8 columns, 12 columns, this is the number of columns suggested at that screen size. And note that you can actually go over 12 columns. So Bootstrap, I don't know if there's any way to get around just having 12. But with material, having 12 on much larger screens is possible. Another thing to take note of on this, there's a couple little circles with numbers 1 and 2. These indicate the number of panels that your UI should be using. So on a smaller device, you should just have one main panel of information. And then on a much larger device, you can actually have above 2, so 3 or 4 different panels of information. And we'll see some examples of that in a minute. Okay. I want to look at these grid examples for material design. I'm not sure how great this is going to work on this projector, but we shall see. Okay. So this first example is just an example of the 12-column grid and some of the panels and UI. So there's the columns and how some of the movements can happen. And we'll talk and see some more examples of what this is actually doing and why. So let's go to the next one here. This one is margins and gutters. Here at the bottom you can see material design uses a lot of 8 dp, 16 dp, it's all in the 8s here, 40 and 24. So this is your sort of padding and margins and things like that. Here's some examples of 8, 16, 24, 40, and then 40 and 24. And got an example, a centered UI versus a full width UI with the grid. Once this resizes, it actually gets squeezed down and shrunk, flexes down. When this resizes, it actually rearranges the elements. And this is a permanent panel. So it's going to open up and it squeezes the content on the right side when this permanent panel is added. And we'll see a couple examples of persistent panel and a temporary panel here. So this panel will come out and squeeze. There's a persistent panel. And then a temporary panel actually pushes the content off of the screen. So it's temporary because you need that content to come back on the screen. But when they have this temporary panel open, clicking outside of the panel will dismiss it. Or selecting something in the panel will usually dismiss it as well. And here's a temporary overlay. So this is actually going to slide out over the top of the content. So again, content on the main panel is being sort of hidden or lost until you're done interacting with this side now. And that's all for these. Okay. So the next part of adaptive UI here is surface behaviors. Now, these are different behaviors for visibility. And we've already mentioned a number of these terms: permanent, persistent, and temporary. These are definitions just to understand if a designer or someone's talking to you about certain words here, you can look them up and see exactly what they're talking about. This table contains a lot of different width-based behaviors. So we talked about squeeze, we had content that was pushed off the side, we had an overlay that came and covered up the content, and then there's fixed and some of the others here. Then we have terms that are used to describe positioning and for both in motion and at rest components. So for in motion, there's the over and under. So it's an element that's actually animating over the top of something or under something else. And then we've got, I think above and below, top and bottom are very similar, except for just top and bottom kind of talk about the top of the screen or the bottom of the screen. Summary and detail, I'll show an example of. That's something when you're just reading through the docs, it's kind of hard to understand what they're talking about. The summary area and the detail area, we'll talk about that a little more. Inset and full bleed. So inset is, you just got some padding, some margins there. Full bleed, your content goes all the way up to the edge of the screen. Okay, now we've seen the grid and defined some of the behaviors. We're going to look at some of the patterns to consider when building a material design app. So the first pattern is reveal. And so all these patterns, left is going to be mobile, right is going to be desktop. So on the left side, you've got a little hamburger menu there. You click that, and the side nav would open on mobile. Whereas on desktop, it's visible all the time. And so if you have a screen size that changes, it's actually going to responsively appear, and the little menu will go away. And transform is a very interesting pattern. There's an example right here you can pull up on your phone even. I think on most phones it'll work landscape or portrait, it'll switch between these two. So on tabs, for desktop, it's really good because you get discoverability. People can see all your menu items, they know what's there. Whereas a side menu that pops open, a lot of that might be hidden to people. They might not know there's settings, or they might not know there's a certain function there. So if you need discoverability, tabs are really great for navigation. But then going to a mobile device, tabs may be problematic. Angular material has a way to sort of scroll through tabs, which is pretty nice, but you may just want to use the site now. And then divide. So I said we're going to talk about summary and detail. This is an example of that. Your summary content, maybe a list, may have 2 or 3 lines or just 1. And then your detail content, say you click on a person, it may open up an email on the right side or some other sort of detailed content, their profile or something like that. So in this case, it's dividing the screen as the space becomes available. So we talked about 1 panel versus 3 panels. So on a smaller device, you probably just want 1 panel. You would click on something, it would just show the details content. The single panel would take over the whole screen. Whereas on a desktop, you can have multiple levels of your UI. It's up to you to find the right use case. Obviously, you don't want too much complexity in your UI, but for certain cases, you might want something with 3 panels like this. So Reflow is the next one. Elements may reflow from a single column to fill the content area in various combinations. So this is more than just running out of space and dropping the next element down in the row. You actually can define how that behaves with very complex grids, so you can get something like this where you have a single, a double, and then a single taking up the whole row below. So you can have these grid lists that have very rich behavior. And you can have multiple different sizes. So even though it's desktop, you might have, for 1600 screen, a very different grid than you might on a 1200 device or 800. The next is expand. So we saw the examples about the gutters and the margins. So on the right here for desktop, we may have a very large display and there's not really a need for the content to be stretched. There may be large white spaces between that don't really look that great. So you can have these nice margins. So even though the screen expands, you can keep your content at the size that you think is the best to display it. And then on a mobile device, you can have it automatically get rid of those margins so that you can get the most of your content into that vertical area. And there's another demo right there that you can try out on a phone, or if you check out these slides later, you'll be able to give it a shot. Okay, so there are a number of tools. Many of these were announced at the Polymer Dev Summit in Amsterdam in September. One of these tools that I thought was really interesting was something called Resizer. Basically, this tool is going to show your web app in these different resolutions and allow you to actually interact with that. So I'm going to try to show a video of this and from that Polymer Dev Summit, which really, I think, does a good job of explaining. Where's the video? I will just open a new window.
By previewing web app in Family Shot, you can examine and compare if any UI elements adapt appropriately across devices. You can input any URL or choose some of the pre-selected size in the side drawer If you wanted to preview per device, you can navigate through the key breakpoints that we'll introduce today for desktop, mobile, and tablet.
Okay. So that's all I want to show there. And next we will see the app layout tool actually has one that you can sort of play with. So this resizer tool is not yet available. It's coming soon. Don't know if that's weeks, months. I thought it might be here by now since it's been a little more than a month since the Polymer Summit, but it's not quite there yet. So now this is an example. They've kind of embedded it into this example. This also has templates, so you can actually see the code. Has these patterns, so I can show you those examples if I can get the right mouse. So we have tab navigation, and now we have a side nav on a smaller resolution. Where's my mouse? Sorry, it's a little hard to see from this. And then they have the expanding card example as well. So you see the margins, and then it gets small enough and it pops full screen, full lead. So let me go play with the resizer now. So I can actually click on these applications and change what I'm looking at. I can scroll them. I can use the menu here for each of these and see how the behavior is a little bit different and how it sizes for these different screens. So you saw an example in the video that, you know, just working with these three overlaying screens may be a little difficult, but in the video they showed how you can just pick a device, then you can pick the different breakpoints. Looks like a really powerful tool. Okay. So Angular material. I've been contributing to this project for, I don't know, 6 months or so when I can in my nights and weekends. So there's a really nice getting started page on material.angularjs.org. On the getting started page, there's a code pen. You can just say open this code pen and you will get sort of a code pen or Plunker or JS Fiddle. It's similar to those, where you've got this working Angular material app and you can just start changing things and playing with it. As well, they have demos of all the different components, and each of those components have code pens. So if you just want to play with a tab or you want to play with inputs or something like that, you just click on that code pen button, and now you have some code running that you can start changing and you can test things. It's really helpful for submitting bugs if you have a code pen that shows the bug. And it also talks about different ways that you can, you know, use the CDN or use Bower and all the dependencies. Project on GitHub is very active. You can see here a lot of issues being fixed right now. Let's see, I want to go here first. So RC3 for 1.0 just came out yesterday. At Angular Connect, about a week ago, 2 weeks ago, they announced 1.0 RC1. So they've been saying that 1.0 is coming. They were sort of hoping for end of the summer. There's been a little more work as far as getting IE and Firefox and a number of bugs. They want to get it nice and stable and get the API stabilized before going to 1.0. But it's definitely getting more stable, as you can see by the 1.0. Lots of components. And the mobile performance has had great improvements in the last month, as well as cross-browser support. I think in one of the RCs there was 20 IE issues resolved, as well as 6 or 8 Firefox and a number of iOS. So that's getting a lot of attention. You can see here, there's people pre 1.0 are using it every day at work. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday through Friday, it's getting 20,000 views and 10,000 unique visitors that are using Angular material. So it's getting very popular. And a lot of companies are still waiting for that 1.0 to be stamped because they don't want to use anything that's not 1.0 yet. So I think this will increase a lot once 1.0 can be finalized. Okay, I've got some examples of some of the flex that I'm going to talk about. Let me just go to one other example. I have an app that I use or that I work with for GDGs. There's a group called GDGX that builds apps for different chapters. So it's for organizers, different tools for organizers. So this is a website. You basically can go to the source here on GitHub, you can fork it, and then you go to the GitHub pages branch and you just push a change and you'll have the site up and running. And you can just associate your GDG, chapter ID, and name and stuff like that, and then you'll have a site. So one of the things I worked on recently was actually making this site have this transform adaptive UI capability. So on desktop, it's got the tabs, and on mobile, you've got the menu there. I'd like to pull it up. Hopefully, there we go. So this is the hosted GitHub pages example. You see, as it gets smaller, you get that sidebar. That material that you can actually scroll or touch to move through. Got the nice little side out there. So that source code's out there. There are also examples in that code base for the expand and reflow patterns. So you can see here that this has got a little more margin on the desktop where it's very small on mobile. So let's see. So who here has heard of Flexbox? Okay, who here has used Flexbox and feels happy about it? Okay, so one of the key things that Angular material does is it takes Flex and it makes an API that gives syntactic sugar to make it much easier to use. You don't really have to worry about things like Flex basis and even Flex grow and shrink and some of the direction and things that might have names. There's justify content and align self and align content. And some of those things can be a little confusing. So Angular material tries to simplify that quite a bit. So let me actually change. Probably it's going to break the Hangout, but where's my mouse? I'd like to be able to see. Okay. Are we still good with the Hangout there? Okay. Let me go to layout and container elements. So they have some really good examples here. Containers are very simple, row or column container. So you have the first item, the second item in a row, and then this is the third item in the row, but this third item is a column. container, which has the first and second item. So in these examples, you'll see this little code icon, and you can open these up and see the code. So it's just layout row, layout column, and then these things are made to flex just by putting flex attribute on here. And you can also notice that a lot of what Angular material does is done with attributes. So these aren't classes or anything like Bootstrap. You're putting classes on everything. There is some use of classes for sure in material, but simple API on attributes as much as possible. So here's some examples of flex. So I just put 3 flex elements. They all take up an equal amount of space. Very, very straightforward and simple. They're just each a div with flex on them. And then there's some additional percentages that you can put. So in this case, we got a flex. Let me see if I can make this a little bigger. Side nav needs to go away. Can you see that? Okay, so we got flex 30, 45, 25, 33, 66. So, and then we have 50, and then we have flex. So this one is just filling whatever space is available, and this one is filling 50% of the screen, or the space that it has in that component. And you can see they flex nicely down, keeping their percentages, and flex up. So those are very simple. You just write flex equals and the value that you want. There are some additional options here. And another thing to note is there's something called layout wrap. So we saw layout row, layout column. On layout row, using layout wrap will get you that sort of bootstrap wrapping where the column or the elements will fall down to the next row. In this case, there's some examples, and there's a table here kind of explaining how they'll behave. There's none, initial, auto, and grow. And none will just not flex at all. It will just contain the content. So it's this size actually just because this text is here. And then this flex is just growing to take up the space that's available. We have flex grow. It's also going to take up all available space. There's a little bit of a difference in there. Flex auto is going to start with the initial space being the text or the contents of that element. And it will grow and shrink as needed with space. There's also the initial, which will start with the height and width of the content, and it will shrink if it's needed. So it'll actually crunch it down and possibly hide some of your content or smash it a little bit. But there's cases where each of these can be quite useful. And then we have a way to actually change the order. So there's another feature of Flex that Angular Material tries to make a little easier. So here we've got -1, 1, 2, and 3. And we're going to change size. You can see these have this greater than MD, so greater than medium on these two. So if I make the screen size smaller than the medium size, those will go away, or they will change order. So here it's 1 and 3, and they're now actually swapped. So there's ways on different screen sizes, without getting into a grid list, of actually changing the ordering of elements in a simple way. Then there's an offset. So if on the left you want no space, you can actually use this offset feature. I see a lot of people try to do this, and instead of using offset, they just put an empty div with, or span with flex on it that's 33 or whatever they want to move it over by. You don't actually have to put an empty element there. You can use this offset feature. And then there's a really cool child alignment page in the docs. And this actually gives you a description about the different alignments. And then it has a little sort of builder here. So if you're new to Flex, this is a great little way to just play with it for alignment. So you can say, I want to start in the horizontal, or I want to put it on the end alignment, or center it. So this is just the horizontal. There's also the ability to do space around. So we'll just intelligently add space between, and then space between actually pushes the outside to the edges. So if I want to go back to the center, now I've got vertical options. I can do start, end, center, and the same thing for column. A lot of people struggle with the difference between row and column and how those are going to behave with these different settings. So if you're kind of stuck on something and you want it to be in the right place, you can go and play with it a little bit here. And you can see in this case, all it is changing is this layout align setting. And so this is a good place to just sort of play with flex. There's some other really good guides out there on CSS tricks and other places where you can actually have an even more rich sort of flex box playground that you can play with to understand how the layout works. And then there's the options section. There's a bunch of different options here. So in this case, on the left and right, we've got a single row. And when we go to mobile, we're actually going to make it a column layout. So very simple. See example here, layout row and layout on small devices, use column. Very straightforward API. There's some nice features around padding and margin as well. So you may want to have a nice margin. And so in this case, you see the padding isn't there. This is right up against the edge. And over here, this one has a padding. And so one of the things to note here is that this doesn't just apply to that container, but it applies to the children. So only to the direct children. So if you say layout padding on a container and you have two items in there, both of those items will get padded as well. If you don't want that behavior, then just use style padding equals 8 pixels or something like that. Then this is a layout fill, so it's actually filling all the way up. And then this one is using fill, margin, and padding all at once. So even though it's saying fill, there's still a margin there that it has to watch out for. So these are really helpful when you're quickly laying out a page. You can just slap padding and throw an attribute and not have to worry about getting the pixels and everything right, because this automatically puts the 8 pixel margin, 8 pixel padding, which is part of the material design spec. Wrap we saw, so here we've got various different combinations of 100%, so 33, 66, and then 3 33s. And so these are all wrapping in a single row. It looks like there's some columns here, but they're actually just wrapping to the full 100% in a row. And they'll just flex as needed to keep in that state. And then there's another here, which is how you actually do the flexing. So this is actually, the first one is 2/3 on desktop, and it's actually, again, when you get smaller, and it might go off. So now it's 1/3 on the left here, and this one's 2/3. So for each of those flex that you saw, flex 25, flex 50, etc., and that's what this is doing. It's just doing flex 66, and then on small, do 33. Very straightforward, very simple. And there's also hide and show. So some of what we saw with transform there, that's accomplished through this hide and show. So you just say hide the tabs element on a small device and show the menu on a small device. So really simple, it's just hide, show greater than small, hide small, etc. And in this case, I have one And then I have 3. I don't know if it goes down to. Yeah, it does. It goes. So there's 2 elements. There's 3 elements, and there's just a single element on a larger screen. So these are sort of the foundation of a lot of the adaptive UI for material design. It's implemented through this Flexbox system. I will say that browser support on IE 9 or something like that is going to be a problem. IE 11 and Edge are supported. Firefox latest versions are supported and work pretty well. Chrome works great. I think Edge is quite good. IE 11, we've done some, or the Angular team has done a number of optimizations around certain limitations of IE 11 and their implementation of Flexbox as well as attribute selectors. But it should work quite well now across all the current latest evergreen browsers. And let me go back and get all those. Okay, that's all I have. I can take questions. I've got 10 minutes or so, maybe less. Yep.
Michael, thanks for your presentation. I'm sure it's going to be in my future. So hypothetically, supposing I was building an IDE, it sounds like Transform is like a really good pattern. What are your thoughts on kind of keeping it simple, using like Transform within material, or waiting for resize, or using something else for like an IDE?
Oh, if you wanted to build out some sort of
on the right, and just on the left, that kind of thing.
as far, well, resizer would just be built or just used to test your application.
Resize is just a library, right?
It's not even a library, it's just a website, a web app.
Oh, okay.
So you actually go to it and you punch in the location of your app,
yeah,
and then you can use that to test it.
Oh,
so
okay.
It's not a library that you import into your project and then load it up.
Talking about the patterns and material, really.
Yeah.
So is Transform, is that kind of like really kind of the go-to pattern for something like an IDE?
Possibly, it would depend on the actual, what you're doing, what you need. So it's a web IDE?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'd love to talk to you.
It's already Angular. I'd love to talk to you.
Afterwards, that'd be, yeah, I'd love to see it. Additionally, I've got a ton of references here. There's videos, there's the material spec. There's also this device DP area. So these are design, they're design pixels or like device pixels. Yeah, so the device independent pixels. So you could say 8 pixels, but on different device sizes, that may not look the same. So the material spec is using DP, similar to Android. Everything on Android is best to use with device independent pixels. So this site actually lists all these different device sizes and tells you how many DP wide and tall they are and what the ratios are. So if you're doing mobile apps, web apps, it's a really helpful site. And there's more videos. And then the forums, if you have questions about Angular material, check out the forums. That's the place where you ask questions, you get help. Stack Overflow has some things. Yep.
So this is Angular 1 base?
Yes.
An Angular 2 base?
Yes, that's being worked on. They made some announcements at Angular Connect. So there's a project in the Angular 2 GitHub where there's some work started on that. So you can take a look at it. I don't think it's ready to use yet in any way, but
it will be like a 2.0 compared to this one that you show 1.0 RC?
Yeah, there'll be some matching version of Angular Material 2 that's built for Angular 2. And I believe they'll be using TypeScript and ES6 and similar to what the Angular 2 is using. Yep.
Yeah, so, you know, I've thought about Angular too and how they're using TypeScript and so forth. Is the Angular, is the sort of the paradigm in the API for 2.0 essentially the same, and it's a sort of rewrite in TypeScript, or does it really change a lot?
The API is changing a lot. All the things that you've done in Angular 1, and maybe you've done it for 6 months or 3 months or a year, there's sometimes things that just you keep hitting because they just don't make sense to do that way, and they're kind of confusing, and certainly things that new developers hit and kind of make Angular learning curve for 1.0 a little difficult. A lot of the goal with Angular 2 is to solve that, to make a lot of those confusing things around directives much simpler, to take all the kind of magic in Angular 1 and make it a nice, clean API that's really usable. In addition, there's performance and mobile support that are really a big focus of Angular 2. Okay. I just want to say thank you very much to Luke for having me here, and for Google for sending me to this DevFest. And also thank you to Thomas Burleson and Topher Fangio from the Angular Material team for reviewing these slides and helping me put this presentation together. Thank you very much.